Well, hi, Andrew. Welcome back to the show. It's so nice to have you here again. I'm super excited.
Hi, Vanessa. It's great to be back.
Yeah. As we've been talking back and forth and so forth, well, first of all, let me back up. Let's set the stage for people. You were here a couple years ago. I can't believe we were talking. I can't believe it's been like almost 2 years since we recorded the first episode. But
Yeah.
you were here a couple years ago, and we did a very, very comprehensive episode on red light therapy, and it reached a lot of people. And there was just so much amazing feedback. And so, but here we are because there has been, like we were talking about, there's been some involvement in the space and, for consumers, and there's just so much noise and also so much confusion, I think, when it comes to marketing and social media. And not only that, but I've gotten requests to get you back on the show to have an additional conversation. So we're going to be tackling some other things and hopefully clear up, questions that people have regarding this very trending topic, which is red light therapy. So again, it's a pleasure to have you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Let's get into it.
Yeah. So let's start out by, like we were saying, there are going to be some listeners here that really don't know a whole lot about red light therapy and sort of just the basics or the foundations. And so why don't you give us whatever kind of brief background that you would like to give, kind of like why you got into the space, but more so just a general overview of what red light therapy is. And then we can kind of dive further into it from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think red light therapy, it stems from, wanting to get more sunlight, wanting to get, appreciating the nature. Then we evolved to have sunlight around us. And, for a long time, we've known about the benefits of vitamin D from ultraviolet, that we synthesize, vitamin D from ultraviolet exposure. But now we're starting to appreciate that all the wavelengths on the spectrum do have biological effects. They have benefits for us. And, in certain moderation of too much UV or blue light from sunlight can be negative. But overall, if it's used responsibly, then it has tremendous benefits. So there's been studies, all the way back to the 60s when it was kind of stumbled upon that they were playing around with the original lasers, the ruby lasers, these red and near-infrared lasers that first were discovered in the 60s. And then, researcher Andre Mester in Hungary started doing research on rodents and started noticing that the red lights were causing the rodents to heal faster, to grow hairs faster. And that's what they kind of kicked off this like laser biostimulation. He accidentally used a low intensity laser on these rodents and he didn't realize. And so that's what it came out of these using these low laser effects on biology, on animals, on humans, and what are the benefits of that. So that kind of took a long time to get adopted into, Western culture. People will say, okay, around the 1990s, NASA started doing some research, took some, lights into space. We're using it for, grow lights for plants, but then they also started to do the studies on wound healing in humans. And so, that's when a pivotal moment of LEDs were starting to become more powerful. Before that, LEDs, were only good for indicator lights, like your old alarm clocks had little, red indicators, and your TV phone remote, your TV remote has a little near infrared sensor that sends the signal to change your channels. But so the LEDs became more powerful and you can put them in an array and, they're safer because they're more diffuse. Lasers very concentrated into a narrow beam, and LEDs kind of have more divergent profile. So it's much safer for your eyes. There's less regulations. They're cheaper to make. They're, cheaper because there's less regulations. So that's where and then gradually more and more devices came to market. They got more and more affordable. And so I was following, the biohacking trends and stuff and getting into that around 2020, what was it? 2015, 2016, so long ago now.
I know.
Um,
I know.
And so I was, going around to some of the biohacking conferences, seeing red light therapy being used. And, I was already using some infrared light. I had chronic low back pain. So I was using, incandescent heat lamps on my low back and far infrared heating mats, and starting to see more of the LED products getting put out there. And, even back then I was like, I can do it, at an affordable price with my background in engineering, get it measured properly, follow the science, and, articulate the science in a way that, clearly a lot of other brands and influencers aren't able to really digest the science the way that I've been able to, and provide that freely to the public on my blogs and content. And then, so I started my business back in 2018, January 2018. So, Gemba Red's 8 years old now. So, we've been around. We're one of the original red light panel companies. A lot of people are just finding us now because, we don't do a lot of mass marketing. We don't, flood your feed with, when you Google search red light therapy, and then suddenly all your social media feeds are filled with ads for red and near infrared devices. You don't really get that from us. So, we've laid a little bit on the lower side, but again, our organic content, our free educational content, is really what's made us so famous and popular, along with great products that are simple to use, easy to use, follow the science. And so we've been doing great for the past 8 years. So that I've been able to dedicate full time to being a red light therapy guy, and running my business is called Gemba Red, and Gemba Red LLC. And, you can find me on social medias, and that's my website, gembared.com. So, so that's where it came. A lot of it started with the biohackers, the early adopters wanting to get into technology and helping our wellness and improve almost everything, because they found that the studies on red light therapy, the science of it is called photobiomodulation. So if you look up the index on PubMed and different research journals, if you type in photobiomodulation, you'll get thousands of hits on this topic. And a subset of photobiomodulation, the definition of photobiomodulation, it is the with the effects of light on biology in a non-thermal way. So that's a very important caveat, is that it's non-thermal effects. There are other studies that do, heat therapies and radiant heat therapies, but this is just different wavelengths of light. And it could be blue, yellow, green, red, near infrared, mid infrared, far infrared. As long as it's applied non-thermally, then it's photobiomodulation. But the majority of those studies are in the red to near infrared range. So if you think about, our rainbow of colors, those are the longest wavelengths that we can see is red. And then just past red that we can't see is called near infrared. And then there's, the whole range of infrared is, kind of chopped up between near infrared, mid infrared, far infrared, because it's such a long range. So we're typically talking around 600 nanometers. That's kind of the start of the red range. And then at around, 760, it becomes mostly invisible to the human eye. And near infrared, we usually work with up to around, the 800s, 900s, and 1000s, 1000s for the wavelengths. And so what they found with this range, 600 to 1100 nanometers, is that it penetrates the skin the deepest. We have what they call like a optical window of the skin, is that these wavelengths work very well with the skin, that they penetrate deeper out of any other wavelengths on the solar spectrum. The blues and the greens will get superficially absorbed by melanin and by blood. And then wavelengths longer than 1100 generally get absorbed by water. So that creates kind of a window of penetration. So these wavelengths can go deeper into the body. And it seems like that's by design, where we evolved this way, because it helps improve mitochondrial function. It provides energy to the cells in the mitochondria, and all these studies are showing, it's such a fundamental aspect of biology. It's like, hey, you need, your proteins, you need your micronutrients, your macronutrients, and you need light for, a healthy system. And, what's happening with our modern, lifestyle is that we've taken away a lot of outdoor exposure and near infrared exposure from incandescent bulbs and fireplaces and whatnot. And so we may be deficient in that, and we're not charging up our mitochondria the way we used to. And there's tons of correlations with, mitochondrial dysfunction of what people call, and all our modern chronic diseases, and, any disease that you have that's even not, an age-related disease. Red light therapy can help with the healing, with the symptoms, with the inflammation, with all these things. So, it's being applied in and studied for almost like every part of the body, every organ, skin, brain, gut, athletic recovery, muscle health, just you name it, it can support it in any way, because it's just so foundational. It's supporting the mitochondrial on just such a fundamental level that, maybe our biology expected to have this exposure, from eons of evolution. So that's where the exciting part of red light therapy comes from, that we can, create these devices that are, super safe, because these are also some of the least heating wavelengths on the spectrum. They're not short wavelengths, so they don't cause photochemical damage, and they're very beneficial. So it's amazing safety profile. You can access it, and they're cheap, and they're very beneficial. So it's such an amazing time to be thinking about red light therapy. And when I say red light therapy, again, it's kind of implied it's red and near infrared light therapy with that range. But usually it's just shortened to red light therapy. So yeah, now's the time to be, thinking about red light therapy, talking about it, and getting into every household, and making sure people have access to it and understand it.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you.
Sure.
And you know what? There, I feel like I was tagging so many things as you were talking. Like I was like, touch on that, touch on that. But one thing that I do want to touch back on is that, first of all, you answered almost the question. I'm going to ask you another question about mitochondria, but you almost answered it already, which was I wanted you to touch on like what it does at a cellular level, right? Like how it affects ATP. But what my observation has been over the course of the last, I would say good year and a half or two, because I think there's just been so much noise and so much more exposure, no pun intended, on like social media and, YouTube and all that, is that there's a lot of people, particularly women, although, it's just because that's kind of like, I see that sometimes more, who are just so focused on like certain benefits, right? Like, oh, well, it can improve for, my skin, or I'm going to use it for anti-age, or like what kind of, red light therapy mask can I wear, or whatever the case is. But what's not being discussed in a lot of these circles, which I think is in part why I wanted to have you back on, is that there's so much more to it. Like there's so much, even though like it's really, we don't want to overwhelm, consumers, and there's really like, as long as they have the basics down, they're good. But there's so many more benefits than just like, oh, I want a mask so that I can age better, or there's just so much more that's happening under the surface, so to speak, where
Yeah.
you're getting so much more benefit, like inflammation reduction from a different standpoint, a different perspective, not just like, okay, like I want these wrinkles to relax, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
So can you touch a little bit, but before we go in, because I want to ask you about like dosing and exposure and why that, matters more than intensity and all that, because we're definitely going to get into that little section. But can you just touch a little bit more on what it does for just the average consumer, like so they can understand from an ATP and mitochondrial perspective, like what is the light actually doing? And how is it beneficial? No matter what their reason is for using it.
Yeah. So that's the thing. There's a couple different theories of what are the kind of photochemical events of what's happening when these, red and near infrared light wavelengths are absorbed by, either the cells or the mitochondria, or even in the water in the cell. There's a lot of different theories, and the interesting thing is, you can't really observe what's going on. So there's a lot of studies. The oldest kind of theory of what's going on is that the mitochondria have a fancy word for it is a chromophore, is the cytochrome C oxidase. It's the fourth complex on the electron transport chain on the mitochondrial wall. So the mitochondria has, kind of 5 steps of, converting pyruvate into ATP, which ATP is adenosine triphosphate, which has 3 phosphate groups, and it's kind of a high energy molecule. And then that molecule is used as the energy currency for, I think some of the studies say it's like 90% of all, warm-blooded, mammalian processes. The ATP is that energy currency. So it's being produced and built up in the mitochondria. And then the ATP is sent out, and it supports functions for the nucleus and all these different healing factors and cellular functions. So that's why it's so foundational. So when the light is absorbed, one of the theories is that nitric oxide may be docked at the cytochrome C oxidase, and it's kind of a weak bond. And so if the red or near infrared light is absorbed by the cytochrome C oxidase, it can break that bond from the nitric oxide, and then it allows oxygen to dock, and that's what it needs to complete that step to go into the next step, the complex 5, the ATP rotor. So that's one of the main theories. So it releases nitric oxide as well within the cell and within from the mitochondria. Helps complete ATP production, because that 4th complex is also known as the rate limiting step to produce ATP. So if you have an assembly line, and everyone's doing their job, whoever's the slowest person on that assembly line, as an engineer, I think I thought about this a lot as an industrial engineer, is doesn't matter where your workstation is, whoever's the slowest is setting the pace for the entire production, right? So it doesn't matter so if you can speed up that one step, that's your rate limiting step, then everything speeds up. So that's why it's so profound that just affecting this one, complex 4 has this profound effect on producing more ATP on its, just on its own. And then there's another theory is that it's being absorbed by the water on, in the lining of the mitochondria and in the cell, and it produces exclusion zone water. That's a very, popular topic from Gerald Pollack has a book out called The Fourth Phase of Water. And he's a doctor that's researched all this stuff. And he found that water will build these high kind of purity. That's why he calls it exclusion zone, because when water builds these structured layers on top of each other, it's excluding any impurities. So it's excluding all that. So what they found is maybe that's happening inside the mitochondria. It's excluding any, ROS, what they call is like kind of gumming up the system. And that helps, make the transfer of producing ATP flow a lot smoother. So it might be the exclusion zone water theory, is part of it. And because it's so intrinsic, there's probably multiple, mechanisms going on. And then the third theory is that it's creating kind of microscopic temperature fluctuations inside the cell or inside the mitochondria. And then that creates kind of little temperature gradients, and that helps push calcium ions through. Either it releases like calcium ions within the cell, or it comes from outside. They don't know, but that also helps promote some of the effects, the calcium and ATP production, nitric oxide. And one of the big things of red light therapy, when we get into dosing, is that it also produces reactive oxygen species, because that's just a natural byproduct of living, of existing, of the a lot of biological processes. We create ROS. So it's not necessarily like a bad thing. We always need to find balance. You can find people that say, oh, I don't want any inflammation in my body. I don't want any ROS. It's like, no, your body still has to find that balance. So the ROS, there's a burst of ROS that's found, after absorbing a dose of red light therapy. And that can help facilitate signaling for healing and signaling for, different biological processes as well. So the long-term effect is anti-inflammatory, even though there's a short burst of ROS. And that's where we get into dosing. If you produce too much ROS, and nitric oxide also has inhibitory reactions, that's where too much dosing becomes a bad thing. So it's not like, if you crank up the energy of in a factory, then, we're much more efficient. But you always run into limitations of like, hey, you can't be just, flying products
Flooding.
off the shelves. Yeah, you can't just be flooding it. There's a lot of mechanisms that we try to find hormesis. We want ATP and all these biomarkers to be within certain ranges. And we can't just say, oh, we're going to pump up ATP and that's always better. So just more is better. That's where, a lot of the fallacies kind of come into play is we want very targeted, specific usage and just to be mindful of how it's being used.
Yeah, yeah. That was helpful. And I think it's important to touch on this stuff because, as much as you and I have kind of chatted back and forth over the last week or so about not wanting to overwhelm people and not wanting, it's like at the end of the day, people just want to know, like, is it safe? Can I use it? How can I use it? Like, what should I be looking for the most? I do feel like it's important to sort of understand or at least get like just some basic information about what's going on underneath the hood. Because I think the more you understand, then the more, I don't know, I feel like then your application can be used like so much more vastly, right? Like just depending on what's going on in your life or what season you're in. I mean, you might have thought like, oh, I just bought this device for this, but here you can use it, in all these other ways. But you need some knowledge, I think, behind just like, okay, I got this device, right? Like because I heard it was good for me. But there's a
Yeah.
lot of I just feel like it's more effective if you have a little bit of a baseline when it comes to like these processes that are happening and how it really affects you on a cellular level. Um, when you were talking about also like not flooding for everything, I was
Yeah.
thinking like this might be a really stupid analogy, but it's like I was thinking about like when people overtrain. It's like
Yeah.
when you overtrain in the gym, and it's like working out creates some inflammation, and that inflammation is actually good because it ends up being better for you long term. And everyone kind of knows like the basic science about that. But when you overtrain and you go too hard, it can be actually a negative thing. And so that's what came up for me when you were speaking about that. And I don't know if that's a silly analogy, but it sort of made sense to me in my mind.
No, yeah, that's great. And, a lot of it's like with training, you have a recovery time after the training, and that's where you're rebuilding muscle
Yes.
and getting a lot of the benefits after the training session has ended. There's a lot of studies on how red light therapy acts the same way, is that you're not necessarily producing all this ATP during whatever, if you do a 5-minute session or 10-minute session, you're not building all the ATP within that session. It actually peaks a couple hours after the session has ended. So there is kind of a lag time that the benefits after a red light therapy session kind of go through these phases, and it can last 24 or 48 hours. Some studies, and researchers will say they can detect elevated levels 5 days after a single treatment of red light therapy. So there's cumulative stacking. If you overtrain one day, okay, maybe that's okay. If you overtrain day after day after day after day, then you can start to run into problems and breaking down your body and your muscles and risking injury. The same thing's happening with red light therapy. People say, oh, well, I'm going to do it twice a day, or I'm going to do it every day, big doses. And that's where, the cumulative response is where a lot of people are running into trouble. And again, I've covered tons of studies on my blog of saying, hey, the clinical way a lot of these doses are being administered is that they're doing it 2 or 3 times a week for a clinical grade, red light therapy treatment. And it's, kind of a long-term thing. You want to give it a couple of months to make sure you see those benefits. And so one of the concerns with red light therapy is that you don't feel anything during the session. It's non-thermal, so you should barely feel any warmth. Maybe with my products, even, you feel a little bit of warmth and it kind of gradually warms up, but it's not like a heat lamp where you just turn on and you feel, oh, it feels nice and toasty. So if you got a high intensity red light therapy panel that feels toasty the moment you turn it on, then, it's way too powerful. It's not following the science. But it's the repetitive dosing, and studies will do it 2 or 3 times a week. For skincare, especially, a lot of protocols will do it. Make sure it's at least every other day, so about a 48-hour washout period for the skincare benefits specifically. But sometimes you have more of an acute issue, so they're using it for oral mucositis, which is that burning mouth syndrome that's a side effect from chemotherapy. And I was just reading Cigna, the health insurance provider, they just put out an update on their policies towards photobiomodulation, and they're covering photobiomodulation, red light therapy for oral mucositis, because it's one of the biggest pathways that they found, that there's not a lot of good treatments for it with conventional medicine, but it's very good for using red light therapy. So there's a lot of good papers on it, studies, position papers on how to dose it, but they found doing it daily is essential. So something that's more acute or something more severe, I say, okay, if you're trying to kickstart some pain relief or kickstart some wound healing, then you do it once a day. And then once you start feeling those benefits, maybe you taper down your how often you do it. So you start doing every other day, see if you maintain that dose. So it's all about finding your maintenance dose, getting your benefits, and then tapering it down and finding your maintenance dose. Because a lot of people will feel really good in the beginning, and if their benefits reduce, they think, oh, well, I need to do more. I need to move closer to my device. I need to do it more often, do longer doses, when it's often the opposite. They need to go down in dose to maintain those benefits.
Yeah, it goes against sort of like you said, what people typically think. And I have like just a personal example of that. And the story actually, because we were talking about it, but my mom fell, a couple months ago, and I lent her my device. And she kept saying to me, well, like, how do I know that it's working? Or should I just do more because I'm in such an acute situation? Like, should I just do more? And I told her, and this is thanks to you. I mean, because I've learned from your blogs and also our interview and so forth. And I was like, no, actually, you really need to just make sure that you do it consistently, because you're in an acute situation, maybe daily for like the 10 minutes. And, that one has a timer on it, which is great for her. But it's interesting because her mind went straight to, oh, I should be doing this like multiple times a day because I'm in such an acute situation. And I was telling her more is not better. And then as she got better through the last couple months, I said, hey, you should continue to use it. But also you don't need to use it as, maybe as often, because you're in a situation now where you're kind of past that acute point in your recovery. And so, but it like goes against, I think, just because we want instant, of course, right? That's just natural for us all, right? Like, we want to get fixed quick, and we want like the pain. I mean, I'm the same way, right? I use it largely for pain relief, and it's like, yeah, my brain would naturally go to, well, shoot, I want to sit here for an hour. You know what I mean? Because my leg hurts or my hip hurts or whatever. But I have found it to be much more beneficial to be modest with the dosing and follow the advice that you have given, because it's just been so much more effective.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's definitely a marathon, not a sprint with red light therapy. And, just a lot of these holistic things. If you're taking supplementation, changing your diet, doing your workout routines, whatever it is, it's a slow implementation. It's about making sure it's sustainable in the long run and not to overdo it. And then, people start to run into issues that way.
Yeah. Yeah. You said something too that I actually had written down because it was a question, and it's like the question was, why do some people notice effects right away and some people don't? And I think you sort of answered it, but just taking it a step further, why do some people notice like a very quick reduction in, say, inflammation or pain, and then others say it takes a little bit longer? Is it just completely bio-individual or just specific to what's going on?
Yeah, I think, it's so bio-individual of what type of pain is it, where's the pain, what's it coming from? Is it an acute pain that, you bumped your hand on the door, or is it a chronic pain that you've had for, decades and you're trying to reverse it? Usually the chronic pains take a little bit longer with some patients. Acute pains, they probably would have resolved themselves anyway with time, but red light therapy can speed that up, but you'll never be able to do a study to know, oh, my pain stopped in 2 days when it normally would have stopped in 5 days. So, that's kind of the ambiguity of red light therapy. And that's, where you really do need to have some very clear goals on, what are you using red light therapy for? Pain is obvious. Sleep is good, but if you have a sleep, might want to use some sort of sleep tracker to help you quantify it. Energy levels, skincare, you want some really good before and after pictures, get some good pictures, with some good consistent lighting. And because it's going to be so gradual, over at least 6 months, and then you look at your pictures and you're like, oh, something did change, but you're not going to notice over 6 months if something gradually changed. So, or maybe, you see a friend that you haven't seen for a long time, they say, hey, your skin looks great, something like that. So it's hard to really track it, again, because it's so subtle, it's so foundational, and it's just helping the body do its own functions. There are great cases where diabetic wounds and non-healing ulcers where they haven't healed for a very long time, then they apply the red light therapy and they start to heal. And it's pretty amazing. So some cases like that are very obvious. So the more people can be with specific goals and not being like, oh, I'm just trying to boost my mitochondria, or oh, I'm just trying to boost, get some vague, goals of benefits of you think you're just going to have this device and kind of use it haphazardly and get some benefits. It's hard. You got to have some real goals where you're going to use it. Sometimes just using it on your skin and on your face in the mornings can give you kind of energy. So I'd say, hey, if you want to help sleep, use it in the mornings on your face. It's benefiting your skin and eyes as well, because, we use low intensity products. If you get from a different brand, maybe you need eye protection, but I think that takes away such a huge benefit of not just your eye health, because your eye is rich in mitochondria and, it's will degrade. There's so many different ways of age-related macular degeneration and eye degeneration. But also great for your circadian rhythm, getting that bright, red light in your eyes in the morning, get that boost of energy and alertness. It shuts off your melatonin production in the mornings. When you wake up, you want to shut off your melatonin production so you get that alertness. And then it helps sync your, the rest of your day into your night. So there's tons of benefits of like little hacks like that. That can do it if people just want general wellness, like use it on the face and the eyes. There are kind of systemic benefits of red light therapy. So we kind of talked about the mechanisms that happen within the cell, but there's so many mechanisms that happen outside the cell. With the nitric oxides being released, it helps with blood circulation and blood flow. So that's why it's really good with healing and non-healing wounds and hypoxic areas. But they've also found it's either from the circulation of getting the red light therapy into the bloodstream, or just how, the body kind of communicates with itself across different areas. They found, a lot of great studies on systemic effects. That means it's kind of like a whole body effect. So if you treat your gut, it helps your brain because it lowers, maybe it lowers inflammation in the gut, balances your microbiome, and all the studies of the gut-brain connection. So a lot of studies are now combining gut treatments with direct brain treatments when they're, doing brain health studies. So, that's kind of a systemic effect. Or, one study, they had 2 wounds on the arm. They only treated one of the wounds, but the other arm healed faster than the control groups, right? Because of the systemic effect. So it gets into the body, gets in the bloodstream. So, that's an amazing effect as well. So there's a lot of, hopefully, again, that just kind of helps you reassure people that you don't need giant full body devices necessarily. You don't need to spend all day, trying to cover your whole body. And really, kind of trust your body to get the benefits in the long run.
Awesome. Yeah. I feel like there's just a lot. I was thinking about all of the questions just now that I've gotten over time, and like there's so many, because I think I think people are like, okay, well, if I want to like do total body, but I have like a small panel, does that mean that I have to like sit there for 90 minutes and like spot treat all across the body, which is not necessarily the case, because there is this systemic effect. And I want to wrap back really quick to what you said versus acute versus chronic. And again, I'll give you a little example, a personal example, sort of, is that my therapist, so my physical therapist or fascia therapist, she uses red light therapy as well, and also in her practice. And she will say, and if she listens to this, she'll definitely be like, oh yeah, she notices a really big difference between acute things versus chronic things. So she says she notices such a drastic, immediate change with something acute. versus like things that are chronic, which, there's a little bit more, I think, history with whatever's going on in the body. And so maybe the effects might not be as noticeable. But she's like, anytime like someone comes in or they have a real acute issue, or even herself, she will apply, red light to whatever's going on. And it's like so drastic. And I find that with myself, you probably laughed at like some of the things I've shared on social media, because I feel like when I hurt myself, it's always like the first thing that I do. And what's
Yeah.
crazy about it is that I really notice, and I'm like, could this be like placebo effect? But then I'm like, I don't think so. Because when I do say, if I've stubbed my toe really hard, or if one of the dogs trips me, or whatever the case is, because those things happen, I am like, I grab the device more times than I don't. And by, I would say, within 24 hours, no, probably less than that, there's a serious reduction in feeling, I would say, negative or quote unquote symptom with it, versus like something that I regularly treat, because there's a couple areas of my body that I regularly treat, and that's a little bit of a different response. So just kind of like wrapping back to your point about like how it's different, and also just not having to like apply it, like continue, like for 90 minutes or whatever. Cause I don't, I'll do like
Yeah.
just 10 minutes and be done, and possibly not even treat it until like 48 hours later.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that's the thing. Is with red light therapy, it's like something everyone should have as like a band-aid, or what I mean. Like it's
Like in
like
your
if you got
toolkit.
a
Yeah.
scrape, right, a scrape, a bruise, anything, you don't want to rush, and that's where I get expedited orders. Oh, I need this before, because I just hurt myself, and I
Yeah.
really need it now, and I'm like, don't wait, till there's an emergency, like you know it's great just to have and think of and don't forget about it, like think of it for almost any small especially acute things, but again, if you're using it chronically anyway for longer term conditions, skin care and brain health and gut health and all that stuff, so you might already have it. And there's also some great benefits of cellular preconditioning versus using it after the fact. So a lot of times you can use red light therapy before you work out and before you train, and that helps protect the muscles and protect the cells and helps that with the process. So there's even studies on like, oh, should you do red light therapy before or after training? It doesn't seem to make a big difference either way, as long as you're using it consistently, because technically, because the benefits are working inside your body on both ends. If I do red light therapy the night before and then I train in the morning, you kind of already did it before and after, and then you do it again at night. So you're kind of always doing it before and after, as long as you're using it consistently. And so there's a lot of good benefits of preconditioning the cell of, even like there was an interesting study. They used it on the brain, and it helped reduce like the mental load and the stress of like some sort of puzzle that they had the patients go through. So it helps you with that physical stress when you precondition with red light therapy. Again, might be a natural cycle of, oh, we were supposed to get sunrise in the morning. A lot of this relates back to, nature, that the red and near infrared in the sunrise and sunset are a higher proportion from sunlight because it's being filtered from the atmosphere at an angle. So there's more atmosphere that's scattering and diffusing the shorter wavelengths like the blues and the UVs out of that spectrum. And so that's why, the sun kind of appears more yellowish or reddish in the early mornings and the evenings. And so that's your best time to get, free red light therapy from sunlight. And maybe that all ties back together into why our bodies are so responsive. The timing of day, if you want to optimize it, do it, in the early mornings. Maybe in the evenings, I don't do it on the face and the head and the eyes in the evenings, because that could also be too bright and stimulate you and you kind of keep you awake and a little bit too much. Some people, you can use it on your chest or your gut or any other part of the body. And sometimes that helps people wind down when they use the red light therapy at night on their body. So that's another great way of, you can get it for free from sunlight. And it seems like we can mimic sunlight, throughout, different parts of the day.
Sometimes I feel like it helps me just by setting the light at night off of me. So sometimes I'll set it like a few feet away, or I'll just set it, like I have the lights on low. I know that, but I'll just light up the room a little bit with a little bit of that light. And I find that that is really relaxing. Also, the dogs really love it, which I
Yeah.
think is really
Yeah.
interesting intuitively. I have one of my dogs, she like naturally really gravitates towards the light. And so sometimes I'll just set it there, but I won't usually put it directly on my face or my
Right.
eyes at night because I do find that it's a little stimulating.
Yeah.
Also,
And that's,
go ahead. Go
oh,
ahead.
yeah, yeah, and that's what I saw early on with a lot of my early customers. They were also just using my red light therapy panels at night as like a night light. They would aim it at the wall and just kind of let it reflect and diffuse on the wall because red light at night, we want, low brightness red light at night because the blue and the green light from like a standard white LED bulb might be too harsh. It shuts down your melatonin production. So red, dim red lights at night can help you with your sleep and your circadian rhythm. Try to replace as much and turn down the brightness of your screens and use the red filters on your screen if you have it, or wear blue blockers. And so all that goes into it. So I saw people were using my panels, they're low flicker, the red light for nighttime lighting. And I was like, oh, I should make some red night lights. And they didn't really exist. Right. They didn't really exist when I first started doing all this. So I started making plug-in night lights and a little screw and light bulb and book lights that are pure red. So all of them are just pure red. They're low, very low intensity just for ambient lighting. They're not meant for like the photobiomodulation we're talking about. But again, that's all. So it's a different application of red light. It's the low intensity ambient light at night that you're kind of talking about. Is and sometimes you can just use a red light therapy device and aim it at the wall or let it diffuse in the room. But I was like, well, those are kind of expensive night lights, so I made the cheaper little light bulbs. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, I just find that it's just really soothing to me,
yeah,
because
yeah.
I'm not one to turn on bright lights at night. Like I'm like anti bright light. In fact, I like almost annoyed. Like I get like mentally annoyed when there's like super bright lights on.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
never, yeah, I tend to walk around, more in the dark than anything. But I wanted to ask you a question about heat, and I feel like we might have tackled this in the last episode. But there's a lot of people that combine like heat or sauna therapy with red light. And is there something to be said about how that should or should not be combined? Should we be doing red light therapy like prior to, say, getting into a sauna or sweating?
Yeah.
Like, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've covered this a bunch of times in my content of the science doesn't seem to be supporting of combining the true, photobiomodulation, red and near infrared light therapy with like sauna or again, all these high intensity LED panels are just so high intensity that they're, all the photons are being converted into heat, and that doesn't really add to your photobiomodulation experience. It might feel nice as a fancy heat lamp, but you can get those red incandescent heat lamps or something a lot cheaper than buying an LED panel that just puts out too much power and is just a fancy heat lamp. So the science isn't there. So some of the studies will show that if you combine this red and near infrared light therapy with too much heat, and it only has to be a couple degrees Celsius of elevating the tissue temperature, it massively increases how much ROS is being produced by the therapy. So again, with photobiomodulation and tons of different exercise and whatnot produce ROS, but when you're double dipping on PBM and photobiomodulation and heat therapy, then they find that's too much ROS, and so that could be contributing to the biphasic dose response of getting negative effects or kind of negating your you don't get benefits essentially. So and there are researchers like Dr. Praveen Arani who talks about this on when he gets interviewed and has published it, is that the heat will kind of negate your benefits. So so I kind of analyze that from that perspective of like, there doesn't seem to be a good reason to combine them. And whenever I recommend people separate them, because they're getting the full spectrum saunas and they're getting, saunas with all these add-ons and whatnot, And, it sounds good. You want to save time. We have like 10 different biohacks we need to do a day, vibration plates and hydrogen therapy and cold plunges. And what if we can just put them all in one device? I would love that. But, a lot of times it's like, and then the sequence also is important. So knowing that, there's also really good studies on cooling the skin before or during red light therapy. And that helps reduce the blood flow to the skin and helps the light penetrate deeper. So a lot of times people want deeper penetration. It's kind of a myth, but if people actually want deeper penetration, then you want to cool the skin. So if the heat will invite more blood flow to the surface of the skin because it's trying to thermoregulate, and that blood is going to block more light and more of the penetration. So cooling the skin, and studies do this, they'll pre-cool the skin, and you can be really simple. Put some ice packs on, use a cold gel, use a cooling, just an ambient cooling fan with the air temperature. And so some of the studies, not only does it benefit penetration, but when they use high intensity and high doses and they cool it, so at least you're not heating the tissue up, they negate a lot of the ROS. They negate the negative effects of combining heat and red light therapy. So at least, I tell people, because I can't stop them a lot of times from using high intensity because the marketing's so strong on that. Use a cooling fan, just a fan, whatever. Go to Walmart, get a fan, and blow it on your skin and on your body during your red light therapy treatments. So at least you're negating the negative effects of that heat, and you can still enjoy a high intensity, the supposed benefits of high intensity. So, that's a great thing too. So those two benefits of cooling, of negating the ROS and improving penetration. So then the other issue is with all these full spectrum saunas and red light therapy saunas and whatnot. It's, they're combining, infrared panels, and your goal is to heat yourself up. And, it'd be nice just to do, one thing and not, try to make a Swiss Army knife out of everything. But then even if it was theoretically a good idea to add red light therapy into saunas, then the implementation is so haphazard and, a lot of times just clearly a marketing gimmick that these full spectrum saunas will add like a small little LED array. They'll just cut out a small part of the far infrared emitter and put in a tiny little LED array and call it, we added near infrared. And so they kind of just check the box for marketing, but it's not really going to give you any therapeutic intensity levels. A lot of times people mistake the overhead lights. So sometimes they call it like they have the RGB lights, the red, green, blue lights, the lights that the kids have in their rooms. The RGB lights overhead, those, are more of a chromotherapy that maybe the colors of light, kind of affect our mood and our psyche. But it's not red light therapy. So if you have your overhead lights and you just kind of switch them to the red mode, it's not going to be therapeutic intensity. So a lot of times the sauna makers will conflate that. And then the other thing is, they'll try to add in quartz halogen heaters or, basically fancy patio heaters, and they glow kind of red because they run a little bit hotter than your standard infrared panels that are built into the sauna. And you get a little bit of visible red and a little bit more, near infrared and mid infrared. But again, you're not really quantifying the intensity output. So even if it was theoretically a good idea, which I don't think it is, then the implementation, I think, is like doesn't make sense. And a lot of times they cover up the real estate that should just be far infrared emitters with these red light therapy panels, when you'd be better off with just more far infrared panels that just heat you up and actually do the function of the sauna. Because red and near infrared light, a lot of that light gets reflected off the skin. The reason why far infrared is so good for sauna is that it's absorbed very well by water, and that's why so much of it gets converted into heat. And it's very efficient at heating us up. It doesn't reflect from the skin. Scott Zimmerman says, if you've got like a far infrared camera on someone, then your skin just kind of looks black under infrared light, because we're just absorbing at the longer wavelengths, the mid infrareds and the far infrared. So red and near infrared light, again, don't really heat you up because a lot of it reflects off the skin, and then what gets absorbed penetrates deeper, so it gets diffused throughout the skin, over a bigger volume. So there's so many reasons it doesn't make sense to I don't, you can call me biased of like, oh, you need to buy my product and don't buy a sauna with red light therapy because then I'll go out of business. But well, it's up to you. I'm just laying out the facts. I've got tons of studies to back it up. I don't, it's highly speculative right now. Maybe in the future, there'll be some studies on full spectrum saunas and what we even define that as. But right now, the science doesn't look good for combining heat and photobiomodulation.
Yeah, no, good. I really wanted to touch on that because I recall, I think, speaking about it before, also just from learning about
Yeah.
your stuff on your blog and everything. And in fact, it's funny when it comes to like heat and like the cooling the skin a little bit. Like ever since I learned that from you a couple of years ago, this is silly, but it was simple. And I thought, oh wow. I actually just made sure that when I was going to go do my red light, I didn't take a shower right before because
Yeah.
I tend to take like really warm showers and I wanted to make sure that my skin was cool. So, I'll definitely like gear my little 10-minute session or 15-minute session or whatever it is. If I'm doing it that day, I'll make sure that my shower is not prior to that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, the sequencing. Yeah, you can do cold
yes,
plunge, then red light therapy, then sauna,
then
then
sauna.
exercise.
Right.
So you can think about the sequencing to optimize. So if people get into optimizing their sequence, is it going to make a huge difference? As long as you're doing them all within a reasonable, or space out, your heat stuff, hot showers and sauna, and then wait a couple hours to cool off and then do red light therapy, So simple
Yeah.
stuff like that. It's not about, now you can't use red light therapy all day, So I would
Right.
never discourage someone from using red light. If you accidentally showered and
Oh,
you're hot, and you
yeah,
need to use just use it. Don't worry about it.
absolutely.
Don't, I don't want people, like we said, we don't want people to overthink. But again, it's for the min maxers that are trying to optimize, and that's what I would recommend.
Yeah. It's definitely not like, oh, now you're in trouble type of
Right, right,
situation. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Speaking of trouble, I would love to move in to this, kind of this part of the conversation with safety because you've said that several times now. Like, there's like things are generally safe, and as long as you're, doing it the right way. But why, part of the thing that I really think is, I don't know, kind of confusing people or even like misleading people is that there's a lot of misuse. I mean, we were talking about like ways to use it
yeah,
here, but misuse, and a lot of that is coming from, and it's unfortunate, but a lot of it is coming from like influencer behavior online. And like red light therapy is generally very, very safe to
yeah.
use. Over there's so much information now like that really just makes that so apparent. But can you talk a little bit about people on social media and influencers sort of like doing the wrong things and why it's kind of incorrect, and or like what side effects that they're experiencing, and also like just confusion too coming from different brands according to their education and marketing. I
Yeah.
know it's a mouthful, but you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, right. But it's like there's a lot to unravel of where it started and where it came from and why would it still being perpetuated today of this narrative. Okay, you need high intensity. So intensity is the power output of your device per unit area. So intensity is your milliwatts per centimeter squared. So that's a unit of power per unit area. So you can call it power density, you can call it irradiance, you can call it intensity. They're all kind of interchangeable. And you can measure that with, it's a spectrometer, with a power meter, with the optical power meters, and you measure that output from your device at whatever distance you use it at. So one of the things that happened was, companies obviously want to differentiate and say, hey, we have something that's exclusive, right? That's how you sell anything. It's like you claim to have something exclusive, that you came up with some new product that no one else can do, so you have to buy it from them. So they came up with, the differentiating factor is you need high intensity for medical grade red light therapy or whatever they want to call it. And then something also happened is that they were measuring their devices, a lot of the original brands, big name brands, all the influencers that pretend to be experts were parroting this and using this, is that they measured it with a solar power meter. So you can get one of these solar power meters, they're like $100, and they measure intensity, primarily for, if you have like a solar farm and you want to measure the angles and make sure you get the optimal angle of your solar panels, something like that. So it measures sunlight pretty decently. But when you measure isolated red and near infrared light, people didn't realize it's got a photosensor, a silicone-based photosensor. It's very common, but it's got a sensitivity curve that gets more sensitive as you get into the red and near infrared wavelengths. So when you're just measuring red and near infrared light from this solar power meter, it's going to falsely inflate those numbers because it's more sensitive for those wavelengths, and it's falsely inflated those numbers by 2x. And so that's where a lot of people were coming up with this number of 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared at 6 inches away or whatever distance. That's where that magic number came from. And that was published in influencers' books, influencer blogs, everyone, that all got pushed down, from the brands to the influencers that were pretending to be unbiased reviewers and experts, and, pushing that narrative of you need this magic number, 100 milliwatt. It's like, well, why not 150? Why not 200? It's because the number on the test meter helped them sell that particular number. So that's where a lot of that came from. So it came from false numbers. So a lot of the original brands that came out when I first came out back in 2018. So this is it's become so normalized, people don't even realize. So all these narratives, you need at least 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared for deep penetration of the light, which the intensity doesn't work that way. Penetration is a function of wavelength and your optical properties of your skin, and it's not so much affected by intensity. All you're going to do with high intensity is heat up your skin because most of the light is still absorbed within your first 10 millimeters of the skin. So so they all created all these narratives, and I need this for penetration, for proper dosing, to get all this stuff, and none of that was true. And they proved it wasn't true because the devices that they were selling was actually emitting less than 50 milliwatts per centimeter squared at 6 inches away, and people were getting pretty good results. No one was complaining about it. I think that's the elegance of red light therapy. You can measure it wrong. You cannot know about I talk about skin contact method, and a lot of light gets reflected off your skin. About 60% of red and near infrared light gets reflected off your skin. So when you take your selfie in front of a red light therapy panel, your face is glowing very bright red because you're reflecting a lot of that light. And people didn't account for that when they talked about dosing. A lot of studies prefer pressing the lasers and devices into the skin to help overcome those reflection losses. So they weren't accounting for that either. So all these brands and influencers actually proved, if we could just analyze, I'm not trying to be like, they made a lot of honest mistakes that were very profitable for them and whatnot. But if we can analyze it, they actually prove something very interesting, is that they use very low, what they would call low intensities, even though, according to their own books, their products were ineffective, and low doses because they weren't accounting for reflection losses. And so what's happened? They proved themselves wrong. You don't need deep penetration. You don't need high intensity. You don't need it. They experimented on humans for almost 8 years now, and people are getting great results. So what's happening now is when and almost all the brands know, because they have third-party testing. So they all say the right things. They say, oh, we have third-party testing, but their advertised intensity on their product page is still from the solar power meter. And maybe sometimes they have an asterisk or a little disclaimer, but the average consumer shouldn't have to know, what a solar power meter is and why it's wrong. So it's still misleading. It's very clearly written and the FTC says, having asterisks and disclaimers to cover up false advertising is still false advertising, because it doesn't have to be directly false. It can be misleading, right? So anyway, all that, and so now it's come full circle. So they've had 8 years to correct this issue, so they didn't, but they actually increased every generation of panels, got more and more powerful. And so now we've come full circle, and now a lot of panels are very close to emitting, if not already emitting, actually 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared at 6 inches away. They're actually done it. So they've closed that gap. The lie that they started 8 years ago has come true, and a lot of panels are actually emitting that much power. And now people get to see how dangerous. I was trying to warn people for years. They said I was a fearmonger, and now people, I've got tons of reports. A screenshot of people reporting on social media, on different areas of social media. People having, just first off discomfort from so much heat, and they're trying to tolerate it because they were lied to that they're medical grade devices. When a lot of the medical studies are only using 30 milliwatts per centimeter squared on a full body, bed. So they're using more than twice as much intensity than has been clinically studied on humans. But that's not clinical grade, right? So a lot of people assume clinical grade is like, if it's too low intensity, it's not clinical grade. But also if you go above what's been clinically studied, that's also not clinical grade, right? It's not that hard of a concept. If the drug was studied for, 50, milligrams that you take, but you take 100, then you're taking, super clinical doses. It's not a tough concept. So they're not clinical grade if they're doing higher intensities than have been clinically studied. So now people are starting to feel either burns, you get, skin redness, which again, is hopefully just temporary. You get skin redness. It's like a sunburn, but because it's not from UV, it kind of just fades after a day or two. It's just some skin redness, but so it's not like as bad as a UV burn. That's photochemical, but it's still a heat-based burn. And then, if you have darker skin or pigmentation issues, freckles or whatnot, then that'll respond and it actually builds more melanin in your skin, and you get a tan or you get exacerbated hyperpigmentation or melasma just from, first off, the ROS from high intensities. And secondly, the heat effects that also people, is pretty commonly known. The heat can also on the skin can trigger hyperpigmentation and enhance. So you don't need, most of the time studies say, okay, yeah, you definitely build melanin with ultraviolet A. And a lot of recent studies say blue light exposure also builds melanin production in the skin. And so, and then that's where funny stuff happens, that companies are adding blue lights to some of their devices to market for acne. And then it's like, well, they weren't actually necessary because red and near infrared light can help treat mild acne anyway. Yeah. So most of the time it's, if you want to try, if you have mild acne or whatnot, try red and near infrared light first without the blue. And then maybe if you really need blue, then get something and use it responsibly, because blue light can trigger melasma, photo aging, because it's a shorter wavelength. So, so we've come full circle that, my worst fears have come true for this industry. And there's nothing I can scream and call people out and do all this stuff. It didn't help anyone. So, it is what it is. So hopefully, people can learn the hard way. And realize it, and then they stumble upon my content and my blogs, and they learn, oh, maybe I should use my device further away until you're not feeling much heat, and maybe use it less often, and then they get much better results in the long run. So, that's the thing. So some of the skincare stuff, it's going to manifest most likely in the skin because luckily it doesn't penetrate very deep. So you're not going to inhibit your brain or inhibit, your internal organs, because it just doesn't penetrate that much, even if you're using high intensity. So that also proves my point that high intensity is not penetrating very deep, because if you actually penetrated your brain and inhibited your brain function, then we'd be seeing a lot more problems with people. So luckily our body was built, again, to protect ourselves with all these mechanisms, because a lot of times people say, oh, well, if you go out inside in the sun, sunny day at the beach, it feels hot, and no one's getting harmed from, going out in the sun in the middle of the day, and it feels hot. And, generally, more sun exposure is correlated with better, longevity outcomes, less chronic disease. And that's all true. But, it's still not as therapeutic. A lot of the therapeutic applications of sunlight, the heliotherapy clinics that were established over 100 years ago, those were designed to be in cooler regions like, mountaintops, Switzerland, Buffalo, New York, mountains in Colorado. So these heliotherapy clinics, mostly for like treating tuberculosis, were all a big rage back in the day. And that's where it was preferably cooler climate. So if you're just laying out on the beach at, at the sea level, then you're sunbathing. But if you're up in the mountains getting sunlight in the cool air, then you're doing heliotherapy. Then you're doing therapeutic sunlight therapy. So, it's both good, and people need to decide, okay, are you doing just a supplement for your health and you don't care if you get a little heat and you're not doing it the proper therapeutic way? That's fine if it feels good for people. But if you want to do it the proper therapeutic way, low intensities, skin contact, proper, mindful dosing, doing it the right way. So there are different options that can get you to the same result. And again, that's the miracle of red light therapy, is that people just completely lie about so many things and it's still effective. So, I just try to help people take a step back and say, like, hey, what's really happening that, people were getting good results, even though they have no clue how to dose it properly. They're measuring it wrong. They're not accounting for all these factors, and you still get great results. So that's the amazing flexibility of how red light therapy works. So it takes a really, messed up kind of mindset to make red light therapy panels so powerful that you can burn someone. That's kind of just ridiculous. That kind of crosses a line to me. And then, obviously for the eye concerns, because it's so powerful, our eyes are naturally very sensitive to light. We're meant to have overhead sunlight, and we've got eyebrows and eyelashes and eyeballs that are sunken into our skull. So we're not, accustomed getting bright light source straight into our iris. Right. So that's a big difference. So with LEDs, generally, they're a lot safer because of the divergent beams, and because, the intensity that reaches the eye should be a lot lower by the time it reaches your eye after a certain amount of distance. But again, companies have figured out how to make that unsafe too, with narrow beam angles, not using frosted diffusers, and just making it too powerful. Then that's why everyone has to wear goggles with red light therapy devices, when if you've got a low intensity device, it should be safe for your eyes, safe for your skin, and it still helps you with deep tissue penetration, because you don't have to worry about high intensity for deep tissue treatments. And so, if it's not safe for your eyes and safe for, to treat my brain, my brain and my joints and my muscles, I really need to burn my skin to get the light, deeper. I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. So you got to have patience and use low intensities. And if, again, if you got a panel from another competitor, just be really mindful. You can't trust their measurements. You can trust your senses. Hopefully, if you've got working heat sensors in their skin, just use it at a distance away till you're barely feeling any warmth. And that's probably the best, you can do. You don't have to buy any fancy test meters. Although I do, review a bunch of test meters. Just use it just right past that threshold where you're barely feeling any heat. So again, it's not about, you can't buy from other companies because you're doing it wrong. Yeah, a lot of people are getting great results. I can't deny that. But, in the long run, I think we're creating a lot more hazards. Like you said, not everyone responds the same. I think, if you're a healthy person, you're a young guy, and you're using high intensity red light therapy and it feels good, and you don't have any major health concerns, then using a LED panel as a fancy heat lamp, then yeah, that's great for you, but you didn't really need red light therapy in the first place. So, if you have like a medical condition and you want to use it therapeutically, then and a lot of people, autoimmune issues, that can kind of backfire of overstimulating the body, Lyme disease. So you see that more with sensitive people, and they're the canaries in the coal mine that are going to say, whoa, I feel way too overstimulated by this. I couldn't sleep for days. I felt all wired. I felt all messed up from all these high intensity things. And people just don't know that they have an option to use lower intensity for better results, because they've been so fear-mongered by all the brands, and all these influencers are working together for some reason to create this narrative that you need high intensity all day, all the time. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So people are terrified to use lower intensities. They're trying to tolerate more intensity and power and heat than their bodies should be screaming out to them to like stop. But they keep doing it. So yeah, that's it. So we already know. Yeah. So we already conducted the human experimentation on the study. You use less than 50 milliwatts per centimeter squared And for the vast majority of people, that should be extremely safe. Dr. Hamblin recommends in multiple interviews 10 to 20 milliwatts per centimeter squared for full body red light therapy. And if you're using that, it's almost impossible to overdose. It's almost impossible to have any eye strain or eye issues. Maybe, when you first use it, it'll be bright. It's almost impossible to have any adverse reactions. You will get amazing results in the long run, 10 to 20 milliwatts per centimeter squared. So again, these, they'll influencers and brands will do all these interviews with experts and they don't even listen to them. They just kind of like do it as a whole marketing bit. And they don't actually, I'm like, am I the only person that actually listens to these real researchers? Dr. Hamlin has hundreds of published papers. I've got some of his textbooks behind me. It's like, and people are like, oh, they're totally evidence-based, but then they don't listen to the experts when they actually do it. They try to cherry pick what the experts are saying. They'd say, oh, Dr. Hamlin does say a little bit of warmth and heat is okay. But again, if you're following his recommendations for 20 milliwatts per centimeter squared and you feel a little warmth, then sure, that's fine. That's fine. But if you verified it and, maybe you're a little bit more sensitive to heat or your ambient room is a little bit warmer, so that then they cherry pick that and say, Dr. Hamlin says unrestricted heating, as much heating as possible, as long as you don't burn yourself. And I'm like, where are we going? So we've gone so far off the rails with that. It should be so safe and so effective. You should be able to pick up any device, especially if they claim to be clinical grade, and just use it, follow the manufacturer's instructions, low intensity, 5 to 20 minutes, depending on what you're treating, and then do it, every other day. And that should get you great results. So that's all the average consumer should have to know is get a device, use it responsibly, target the areas that you want to improve, your skin, your aches and pains, your gut, your back, whatever it is. And that's it. So, so all that ranting is just to say, just to get something right. Yeah, less is more. And I have all the science to prove it. And I can see, my competitors and their influencers grasping at straws to, manipulate researchers into saying vague statements that confirm their sales narrative around high intensities and, some heating's okay. What about sunlight? And what about this? Those are all rhetorical arguments. But I've got tons of studies and evidence and, I've been shown it for years. And that's what I've done meticulously for years of breaking down how to use it responsibly and how to actually do it like in a clinical grade way. So ideally red light therapy should be so safe. We shouldn't have even gotten this ridiculous.
Yeah, the conversation shouldn't even we shouldn't even be bringing this up. And
Yeah.
I mean, I've been, for those who are listening,
this was not even a top. When people were talking, when people were talking about it 8 years ago, when they're go back to the old podcasts. When they were talking, nobody was talking about feeling warmth because they weren't. They were only 50 milliwatts per centimeter squared. Nobody had an issue with that. It's like, so I don't know what's changed. It's just the marketing narratives have changed. The science has not changed,
Well, I think it goes to, I mean, like I was going to say, for those that are listening and not watching, I mean, I'm over here like laughing as you're speaking because it just goes to show you like the unfortunate negative side of human nature, which is like how can we pull people in, how can we get to sell, how can we sell more, how can we entice them, how can we, which it's like some things really just are simple. Things really just are they don't need to be messed with. And I think what's happened is like you said, they've messed with things from a marketing standpoint so much that it's created so much confusion. But the end all be all message from influencers and these companies has been like, you need to listen to us because we have the thing, we have the latest and greatest, right, and we've got the top tier, and that's, this is, you have to pay attention because this is it. And that's not really the truth, and this, and I mentioned it on the last episode that we did a couple of years ago, but I started out with another panel from another company, and it was a company who has unfortunately really led people in a direction that I don't think is super, there's not a lot of integrity there. And I'm not going to, who it is, I'm not going to mention who it is, but when I found you, and I can't even really remember how, I think it was a podcast that I was listening to. I don't know whose podcast it was, maybe Matt's, I'm not sure, but I was like, oh my gosh, like this information is so what I needed. Because I started red light therapy really before, I mean, I got my panel like 2019, right? So shortly after I think you started your company. And when I was like in the midst of doing red light therapy within the first year or so, I would say I found you and like your blog and the work that you were doing. And I listened to a show and I was like, oh my gosh, what I would have done to have had this information prior, because I didn't know any better. I didn't know any
Yeah.
better, you know, and I had like, I was, I mean, like I said, I was kind of confused and I didn't really need to be confused because I think the panel that I had was like relatively benign, you know, at the time. I don't know. You probably know more than I do, but um, yeah, I don't know. It drives me crazy because it's like, why can't we just leave well enough alone? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, that's the bottom line. And before we move on, I'm glad that one of my questions was going to be the eye risk. And so you already touched on that, you know, like for
Yeah.
the most part, like
With
with low intense. Actually, go ahead.
Yeah, and Professor Glenn Jeffrey, he actually just did a podcast on the Andrew Huberman podcast. So people like that. I think it's a little bit long for me, but he's been going around, so it's great. I'm finally finding like a lot more researchers that are going on these podcast tours and talking much more practically. So he said on multiple podcasts, you don't need these big, powerful panels. I shared the clips of the on my YouTube channel, but you can listen to the whole videos. And he says these panels are too powerful. You don't need a ton of energy. And he's primarily done a lot of eye health studies. So he was even back in like 2020 or 2021 when one of his research articles went viral on red light therapy on supporting eye health, and they used the little red flashlights on the eyes. And so the first study he did was 40 milliwatts per centimeter squared, and it was through like a milky white diffuser, so that helps with the glare. And his subsequent study did 8 milliwatts per centimeter squared for 3 minutes in the morning. So, and he was confident that he went down from 40 for 3 minutes down to 8 for 3 minutes. And he didn't have to increase the exposure time to compensate for the energy. That's all the dosing calculation stuff. And so he's finding is that using low intensity and the proper exposure time is getting those benefits, especially for the eyes. Again, there's no protection, there's no skin, there's no, it's an open window, and the iris, not the iris, the retina has the most, mitochondrial activity out of almost any other cell, maybe even compared to the brain. And so that's why they need that proper energy from the red and near infrared light. But it works at extremely low doses. So it's not like an energy balance, kind of equation. Oh, I need a certain amount of energy to charge up my mitochondria. It seems to be more like a stimulus from these wavelengths and from these exposure times, and that's what's triggering these cascades of biological responses. It can't be explained by just energy, the joules per centimeter squared alone. And so you can be really confident. He said in multiple interviews, the battery had died in one of his subjects, and it was only emitting like 1 milliwatt per centimeter squared, and they were still getting eye health benefits. So you can go so low with and then there's tons of great studies. So if you're outside in the sun, and maybe if you wear sunglasses that blocks the ultraviolet and that blocks the visible light, but sunglasses do not block near infrared. And so a lot of people are worried about like near infrared with causing cataracts, but that's like an old, kind of came from like the glass blowers industries and other furnace industries where workers were being exposed to very high intensities, near infrared, furnaces, ovens, poor air quality can do it also. And that what caused the cataracts. But low intensity red light therapy is good for your eyes, even the near infrared wavelengths. There's been studies that use that. So the low intensity, generally, if you're below 10 milliwatts per centimeter squared, you have a huge safety margin for the eyes. And, again, don't do anything reckless. Don't shove your eyeball up to a light panel. But we can tolerate, a decent amount of light, and it should be safe again for your eyes, for your skin. 10 milliwatts per centimeter squared for an infinite amount of time of near infrared is the current safety standard, and they think those safety standards have a big margin for safety that you could probably go higher, but they probably made it lower on purpose. So yeah, so there's a lot of margin for safety for the eyes again, but if companies are actually emitting 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared, then you don't want it. And and then I listen to some influencers who think that their device is emitting 120 milliwatts per centimeter squared, but their device is only emitting like closer to 10, and they're telling people to stare at it, and it's like, well, people might actually get a high powered device and stare at it, and then that can cause a lot of issues. So there's a lot of concerns out there for eye health, and again, it shouldn't even be shouldn't be an issue. But
is there any part of the body, and I should probably say this, and I should have probably said this in the beginning, but I did get some listener questions from social media, and instead of like just going 1, 2, 3, and just going down the list, I'm just infusing them through this conversation, and hopefully I'll get to them all. But one of the questions was, is there any place on the body that is not safe for red light therapy, generally speaking?
No, I mean, I would put it. Yeah, you can pretty much put it anywhere, non-invasively. Outside the body. And the eye is obviously going to be the most sensitive area. That you want to be mindful of. So, like, if you're treating your brain with something that's slightly higher power, then you want to avoid the eyes or wear eye protection just as a precaution. Or obviously, anytime you're working with lasers, then you need more eye protection. But if you're working with LEDs, they're generally safer. So again, there's a lot of discernment. But generally, if you flash yourself with a bright red light for a half a second, then it's not going to do anything wrong with your eyes. And then you can. There's a lot of devices that are starting to go inside the body, in the mouth, in the ears, up the nose, and different holes. So there's and there's merits to that, and there's even like intravenous delivery where they'll irradiate the blood with light. So there's tons of applications. And some of the studies, if they really want to access deeper parts of the brain, they can put it inside of a needle, put a fiber optic inside of a needle and get it deeper into the body. So there are a lot of applications. Again, not stuff that you would do at home, but yeah, generally, yeah, you can use it anywhere. Cancer areas is the only areas that have a big precaution that if you have an area that has cancer, you don't want to directly treat the cancerous areas unless, again, you get approval from your doctor or you're willing to take certain risks because you don't know if you're going to stimulate the cancer or have some funky effects. So they typically say, okay, don't treat, any areas that have cancer. So again, that's something you would work more closely with your doctor. If you want to use red light therapy, have them monitor your condition and make sure it's done under proper supervision. Otherwise, you're taking your own risks with that. So stuff like that, using it over tattoos, because of the pigments will absorb the light as heat. And then your tattoos can overheat. So same thing with, if you have darker skin, the melanin will absorb more red light superficially. And so that causes more heat. So you have to be more mindful if you have darker skin type. And then what else? For pregnancy, typically, again, just because there's not any, real studies on it, it's one of those things that they say, okay, don't treat your abdomen when you're pregnant. There's no evidence to say it would be a bad thing. There's some studies on like chicken embryos that show it's perfectly fine. But again, it's just a precaution. If you want to do that kind of thing, you can probably use it on other parts of the body. If you have low back pain during pregnancy or want to use it on your skin, on your face, and whatnot. So that's probably fine. So, avoiding pregnancy, again, is just kind of a general precaution because there's no studies for it. What else? I think that covers most of it. There were some precautions, some older ones about, using it on the genitals or using it on the thyroid because those are more superficial organs. But again, low doses seem to work very well in boosting testosterone, boosting sperm health, boosting hormonal balance. So yeah, all those things can be done. again, low doses, and just, track your thyroid markers if you have a condition, and, track your hormone levels, and make sure things are working the right way. So those are, again, the organs that are closer to the surface of the skin are going to be more sensitive. So thyroid, eyes, genitals, but then that becomes like an interesting area to treat. So you can treat your tibia bone, your sternum bone, and your forehead. And because it stimulates the bone marrow to release stem cells into the body. And so that has powerful systemic effects in the body. So one of the things that people talk to me and they don't know where to treat, I'm like, oh, do your tibia, do your gut, do your sternum, and those have great systemic effects. And then you don't have, like you said, you don't have to do your whole body for hours and hours of trying to do a small device on your whole body. You get systemic whole body effects, tibia, gut, sternum, and then any other areas that you have aches and pains or you want to improve. So you can get a lot of bang for your buck that way.
And would you say that like 10 to 15 minutes is probably max for those, especially for mitochondrial proficiency or effectiveness? Like that would be like the cap is just like that range.
Yeah. So with dosing, a lot of it comes back to the joules per centimeter squared. That's your energy density. It's energy applied to a unit surface area typically we're thinking about this, that's on the surface of your skin. And so that's why, there are some rough ranges of like 2 to 10 joules per centimeter squared if you have more of a superficial thing, your skin care, your superficial organs, wounds and whatnot, 2 to 10 joules per centimeter squared. And then for deeper tissue stuff, then you start to go, 10 to 50 milliwatts per centimeter, joules per centimeter squared of energy. And so how you calculate that is your intensity times your exposure time gets you, your joules per centimeter squared. So I have calculators on this to make it simple. You just type in your numbers from your device and what your goal for your joules per centimeter squared is from your energy. But usually those ranges, if you're following those ranges, you're using low intensity and following those, it ends up being anywhere from 3 minutes to 20 minutes, depending on the device. So I have a range of devices and they have different intensities. So it depends on the device. And then with skin contact, I recommend even lower, even when you're doing a deep tissue, because you get so much deeper with it. So you can only do 6 to 10 joules per centimeter squared with skin contact because it penetrates so much deeper. But with, I mentioned Professor Glenn Jeffrey, and a lot of his studies are showing that it's an activation of red light therapy is the exposure time and not just the joules per centimeter squared. Maybe the joules per centimeter squared are a good corollary and a good kind of proxy. But when you try to analyze all these doses, the joules per centimeter squared doesn't make sense in a lot of cases because, one, it is affected by how fast or how slow you deliver the light. Either the intensity is too high or too low and creates too much ROS when it's too high. And when intensity is too low, okay, maybe you don't get a biological effect because it's, not much different than ambient light. But when you get into these ranges of proper intensity, then it's the exposure time that's super important. So he's found he's been getting very consistent results with 15 minutes of exposure time. Again, he's using 9 milliwatts per centimeter squared for one study on the patient's backs with a decent sized LED panel, and that's it. 15 minutes, low intensity. And that gets you your biological response. So it's triggered. It seems to be much more correlated with triggering the benefits from time, and not so much by trying to track these joules per centimeter squared numbers. Those can get you in the right ballpark. But, it seems like you get low intensity, you use it for the right amount of time, and that's where you get more consistent results, is by focusing on that, as opposed to a lot of people are trying to, again, they're using high intensity stuff and they're like, oh, I'm really smart, I'm going to save myself time and calculate the joules per centimeter squared. So if you have a high intensity thing, oh, maybe your dose is, all this energy is delivered in 1 minute. It's kind of like your hose, on your flow rate on your hose. The faster the water's flowing, the more your bucket fills up. And so that's kind of like your intensity is your flow rate, and then your energy is how much water you've accumulated in your bucket, right? So your energy is how much energy you've accumulated from that exposure time. But it seems like maybe it's not like an energy balance equation. Maybe it's more like we're creating a biological stimulus, and that's where all the benefits are happening afterwards.
Gradually,
So
yeah,
so it's so and then there's cumulative with how often you do it. So that's where, again, there's tons of good science, and I put together tons of studies, not just from his lab, but from a ton of labs, showing a lot of LED studies use this range from 10 to 20 minutes, low intensities, typically less than 50 milliwatts per centimeter squared. And again, that's how you get the consistent results. We're not trying to speculatively kind of min-max your benefits with high intensities and threading some needle of calculating joules per centimeter squared. If we get low intensity and get in the right range of exposure times, then you're going to do really well.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned, and I want to clear something up because I feel like people get confused about this, but you mentioned the skin to skin, like skin contact. And I've had the question like, oh, do you put your panel like directly on your skin, or like how far off should I hold it? And I was like, well, first of all, like what kind of panel do you have? Because that really makes a difference.
Right.
Can you touch on that? Because I find that your panel can actually be placed direct. The one that I have could be placed, the Vector could be placed directly on my skin, and I have absolutely no issue with that. A lot of times I'll set my foot on top, like the bottom of my foot on top of it, but that's not necessarily the case with all panels. So can you touch on that really quick?
Yeah. And, that's just another, myth that's been perpetuated for years and years of this 6 inches away kind of being a magical number to a lot of people, because they see all the companies are marketing, what's their intensity at 6 inches away. All the influencers are measuring their, when they do the little reviews, measuring it at 6 inches away. So everyone thought like 6 inches was like this magical number, when it's like kind of arbitrary. Obviously, most studies wouldn't even use inches, they would use centimeters. Even for English studies, they wouldn't use inches. So that was that kind of came out of using the solar power meter and getting that number. And then also because a lot of the panels know that they've got high EMF when you're close to the device. That's the electromagnetic fields from their fans, from your power drivers, from your circuit boards. It creates these magnetic and electrical fields, and the electrical fields can be mitigated if your panel's metal and if it's grounded. So then you're really just dealing with magnetic fields mostly from the power drivers and the fans. And so that's where a lot of companies said, oh, don't worry about EMFs because you can be 6 inches away and still get a decent, a super high intensity. So that was, again, all these things we think are scientific are just kind of made up as compensation for flaws in the design of the panel. So most of the studies have used skin contact. So they take the laser, press it into the device. They have small handheld clusters. They press it into the skin. So one of the advantages is compensating for that skin reflection, because it'll bounce back into the device, and it's called photon recycling. So it goes back into your skin. So you're not losing all that reflected light off into the room, and it just gets absorbed by the room, right? Then there's another thing, is that when you press a device into the skin, you're compressing the tissue, you're squishing down your tissue, and you're shortening the path that the photons need to go to reach the deeper tissues. And so that's huge. If you press anywhere on your hand, on your body, you can compress your skin, a couple millimeters, any part of your body. So that's what the optics of a lot of my panels do now, is they'll press into the skin, create little dimples, and press and compress your tissue and get it physically closer to the deeper tissues. So that's one of the best ways to optimize your penetration. It's not just cranking up intensity. That doesn't do much. And so it's all about, that skin contact. And then the other thing, when it compresses, it pushes away some of the superficial blood and some of the superficial water out of the way, and it creates a more clear optical path for the light to go. And so if you press into your skin, you can kind of see like that blanching in the skin where your skin's kind of lighter, and then the blood goes back. And that's what our devices do when you press it into the skin. It's pushing away the liquids and the fluids and the blood to create a better optical path. So again, this is a lot of this stuff they didn't really know the science behind. I compiled the science of it a couple of years ago on a blog, but they did it intuitively because they were getting better results when they pressed the device into the skin. So that's a huge area of the science that people aren't really paying attention to, because again, most panels are being marketed as non-contact panels. It is a convenient way It's more sanitary because you don't have to touch something. And if you have multiple people, so there are advantages to non-contact treatments. I say with superficial stuff, obviously skincare, your superficial organs, like I said, and wounds, non-contact's perfectly fine because you don't need it that deep. So deeper isn't always better, especially when you have a superficial target. So non-contact's good for certain scenarios and good for the systemic benefits. So like if you're doing a whole body panel, you don't need to hug a big whole body panel, or people want a big, right. People will, put a 50-pound panel on top of them and squash themselves on a panel. So, that's where I literally get some guys are like, oh, they take my skin contact panel, they put sandbags on top of the panel and squish it into their body to like, Andrew, I'm really maximizing my pension. So like anytime I try to give people advice, it's like they find a way to take it to the extreme. So, it's literally ran into a lot of articles. It says to use slight pressure or to use light pressure, which that doesn't mean anything. You can't quantify that. We don't know how much force or pressure they're actually using. So it's usually up to the discernment of the clinician. But still, you use light pressure. You don't need to press it too hard, and you don't need to break your skin. So just press it into the skin. Right. No, I know. So we don't need to take it too far. Just light pressure. Hold it on the skin. And again, you don't have to measure anything. You put it right on the skin. So that's when I say, okay, if you're trying to target deeper tissue stuff, muscles, joints, aches and pains, your gut health, and anything like that. So it's not always necessary if you're getting good results with non-contact. Again, I'm all about using the least, kind of invasive, least powerful way to get your minimum effective response. So if you're getting good results with non-contact, then keep doing non-contact, right? So just kind of keep that in mind. But if you're not getting results with non-contact and, you've got aches and pains that aren't going away, that's where you might want to experiment with a skin contact device. So like I said, I make my devices all super low EMF. They've used grounded DC adapters, so it's all DC going to the panel. There's no fans inside the panels. And then I purposely lower the power so that way when you have it on the skin, it's not too much power and intensity on the skin. Because if you use, again, an overpowered device, it's already overpowered when you're 6 inches away. When you try to press your skin upon it, then you're really going to overheat your skin real fast. So you have to be very mindful. They're not really designed for that. And if you're concerned or sensitive about EMFs, then that's also a reason you need to use these devices at a distance. So again, it's all different options. I want people to understand you can use distance treatments, and that's clearly working for a lot of people. But also know skin contact is a big part of the clinical grade way of using photobiomodulation. So it's just about letting people know their options and what are the real pros and cons of those. Like I said, there's sanitary concerns. If you use a skin contact device, do you have to wipe it, just wipe it off with a little a cleaning wipe or whatever, and it's fine. Let it evaporate before you turn it back on. So things like that. There's pros and cons to everything. So, that's a big part of the clinical science. Again, conveniently, nobody learns about the skin contact method. And then I get, a lot of the stuff the influencers will read about on my blog, or they'll get a lot of questions from it. And then they try to regurgitate it in their own way and try to put, oh, you don't need it, don't worry about it. Just use 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared and burn yourself, and that'll compensate for the loss of penetration. It's like, no. It doesn't also, and why would you do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my old panel, that had a fan, that would stay on like well after the device was turned off.
That was interesting. That was unique to that brand. I don't know why, it doesn't get that hot, but it has a cooling phase after you turn it off, which is interesting.
It was interesting. I always wondered why it took so long to turn, like with the fan actually it dwindled forever, like when the light would be off, the fan would still be like 15 minutes later. I'm like, 10 or 15 minutes later. Didn't make a lot of sense. I get a lot of questions about the masks. That's probably the number one question that I get.
Yeah, I get a lot.
I'm sure you do. I mean, and I think too, like, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to you, and I'm sure some of my listeners don't even know, but I actually I practice as an esthetician in my past years. And so that's like a skincare question that I often get. But I would love for you to briefly touch on these masks. Like, is it worth it to like get a specific mask? Because people want convenience. Like, they don't want to sit there and hold something to their face. And, I get it. But like, is it really worth it to like invest in these masks, or are they as like beneficial as they say compared to like, say, the Vector, like the small
Yeah,
panel that I have? Like,
right.
can you just speak to that for a sec?
Yeah, I think, with the masks and, some of these more specialized products, it's just more like the use case is more obvious of like, you see a mask with a little face, the silhouette of a face, and you're like, oh, I know how to use that instantly. I just strap it to my face. So like some of it, and then you see a panel, this little rectangular box, and you're like, what do I do with this? It's the use case isn't as obvious. So I think that's part of it is just like the marketing is like mask for face, panel for, I don't know, so, stuff like that. So the marketing is much more targeted. It's not like I have a panel for the face and then a panel for deep tissue and then a panel for this and a panel for that. I say, the wavelengths are very versatile. The intensities are very versatile. You can use them for skincare, deep tissue, whatever you want. So you can I always tell people just start with one device. If your focus is just skincare, then, a mask is fine. So you want it to be, again, a low intensity mask. People are getting these high intensity masks. They're uncomfortable. They build up a lot of heat because they are a skin contact device. So that's kind of good for deeper wrinkles and whatnot. But they also trap in a lot of heat. They don't have any heat sinks. They don't have much mass to them. Generally, and so they trap in a lot of your heat, and then you're recycling all your own heat, and then you heat up your skin. And like I said, I don't like double dipping on the heat and the light therapy at the same time. So again, I would just look for low intensity masks, find one that's comfortable. I think that's the other issue of like, you can't really try 5 different masks and find the one that fits right and feels right because, you want to make sure they all have good return policies, which they don't, because if you're rubbing your face all up on them, they can't resell it. So, I see the convenience of a mask. But like I said, if you get a panel, you use it on your face 12 inches away, 10 minutes in the mornings, every other day, you can get the same results with a panel. So it's just what people can do. But if you find, you're trying to use a panel, it's inconvenient, you want to just strap a mask to your face so you can work on your computer or whatnot, during at the same time, I can understand that. So yeah, I think masks are getting people good results. Again, yeah, it's super overhyped. Again, the same brands and the influencers kind of fall into the trap. They do understand that you don't need as much intensity for this face and for the skin. So some, people are kind of getting that memo for at least for some of the mask stuff. But then they kind of take it and they still put it at the upper limit. They say, you need at least 30 or 35 milliwatts per centimeter squared for the face for these masks and the diodes. And I think that's pretty high for, if I got a mask, again, I would put it down at 5 to 10 milliwatts per centimeter squared. Super low. Again, it's long term. Use it for 10 minutes a day, every other day. And then, be cautious with the masks that use blue light and green light, and maybe yellow light's okay for, that's got some decent benefits, but blue light, they market for acne. But like I said, I think you can get a lot of acne benefits from just red and near infrared light. So I wouldn't jump into blue light. It's not worth the risks of pigmentation and photo aging unless you really have a big issue with acne and you respond well to blue light with your particular form of acne. So it's not like, it's a lot of times the marketing is like making exclusive wavelengths for certain things. You need red for certain types of skincare, and you need near infrared for certain types of benefits. They're a lot more broad and more generalized, and these ranges are very broad of what wavelengths you can use. So again, that creates it much more accessible to people. I'm not saying, you need a very narrow wavelength, and we have the specific wavelengths that get you the best results. Again, that's what's creating the exclusivity to upsell, specific products and specific brands. So masks are good. Again, people can experiment with them. I would like, yeah, I'd just like to see the prices go down. If, $300 for a mask is a lot to me, and I think you can get a lot more versatility from a panel that is sturdy and more robust. I don't like, I've tried some flexible devices and made some myself, and the flexibility, eventually the diodes kind of wear out in the junctions where they're soldered onto the flexible boards. They start to break off, and then the LEDs don't last as long. So with a panel, I know they last a long time. I don't have to worry about them as a manufacturer. They just last a long time. You can beat them up, throw them around, and they'll be fine.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I'm glad you touched on the blue light too, because I can say that just as I mean, I guess I would consider myself a semi-professional when it comes to skin. I know a lot about skin, and people I think are just haphazard with like, oh, well, this is great for acne, so I'm just going to like do the blue light and I'm going to sit in front of it for
Yeah.
what? Yeah, no, actually, you can find so much benefit with healing because red light, near infrared and infrared really will really help target inflammatory issues on the skin at just fine. And so you don't always
Yeah.
have to hop to the blue light. And I think like a smart esthetician actually in the field too would not always necessarily just jump on a customer or a client and apply blue light. I think that there's like discernment there that needs to be practiced and used and is often not.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that you brought that up. Oh my gosh, I had a question and I forgot. Oh, I'm jumping. I'm jumping in my head right now because I know we're on like the
Yeah.
back half, and I want to make sure that I get everything in. But this does sort of have to do with it because skin and beauty and all that. But I've also gotten questions, and myself too. I actually have thought about this as well. No, not time. I don't have time to go into the story, but with hair. Some people are talking about using it for hair loss or the regrowth of hair. Or they go through, like just recently, I've gone through myself. I had like a really severe flu that hit me back in September, and I experienced, and I shed cyclically anyway. Like yearly, I sort of see more of a sort of like a telogen effluvium type of a stage in the autumn. But when I got this flu, it like doubled down, and I really went through, or kind of tapering now. I just went through a lot of hair loss, because sometimes a viral load that severe will do that. And so I have thought, well, it'd probably be good if I maybe targeted my head, but then there are some concerns with that. Like, is it going to penetrate the same way? Because is the hair going to get in the way of the wavelengths? Is it going to really like do anything? So, is there some advice that you can give people for using it for hair in general, just growth or hair loss?
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, it's kind of a paradox of like, you need to kind of have thinning hair in order for the light to penetrate to your scalp. So it's kind of like, well, it's kind of works itself out of the job, because if it does its job, then your hair will block the light anyway. So, or, darker hairs will absorb more light, and lighter, blonde hairs will absorb less light. So there's a little bit of that factor. And, depends on your hair thickness and how much you have left. And it seems like, yeah, it kind of works better on, getting the early intervention as early as possible before if you fully lost it, it's not going to, resurrect, dead hair, follicles and
Oh,
dead
sure,
hair
sure.
parts. But, so if you get it in early, yeah, I lost a little hair after COVID, after I caught COVID a couple of years ago. And, it seems to come back. I did all the things, rosemary oil and castor oil and roller, the pin rollers and the red light therapy on my head. And, did it work? Did it come back anyway? I don't know. So yeah, it's working well now. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of systemic benefits if you're doing a decently sized panel on the face, on the body. Is it helping your metabolism and boost your body? So it really depends on your goals. I think it seems like the benefits of hair growth are a lot more subtle, and it's like, just get a body light
Yeah.
and use it consistently, and don't have big expectations for the hair. But maybe you'll be surprised. Some people do get surprised and satisfied with the hair. because like, and there's a lot of helmets and they're pretty expensive, the laser helmets and the LED helmets, which again are convenient to just put it on your head. But again, you have to be very consistent with it every other day for at least 6 to 12 months to at least, see a little bit of change and really, get a microscope and see if you got some baby hairs. So I'm just like a little bit more hesitant on the hair growth stuff. To me, it's tough to, we kind of talked about the cosmetic stuff is so big. Like I've got a simple helmet for brain health with longer wavelengths that are more for, penetrating the head and the brain. And it doesn't have the red lights that are typically studied for hair growth, but a lot of people want to use it for hair growth because like, clearly it's like the cosmetic stuff is like beating out the longevity benefits and the cognition benefits and the, athletic benefits and whatnot. So yeah, a lot of the cosmetic stuff. But again, I think I would, I try to prioritize function and performance and healthiness and happiness, and then as a side product, yeah, my skin looks good, my hair's growing pretty full, so I kind of have less expectations for that, and it just kind of happens. So I don't know if that helps people or not, but
No,
usually I'm just like, use it consistently and you'll get some cosmetic benefits, skin and hair and all that stuff will come, and try not to be put too much pressure on it, because I think it's like if you're just using it for hair, I feel like you're going to be disappointed. But if you're using it on face, circadian rhythm, energy, athletic recovery, all this stuff, pain relief, and you happen to get a little bit fuller hair, okay, great, that's a win-win.
That's where my head really was with it all, is it's more of like a byproduct, because I thought to myself, like, for me, like I have pretty dark hair. Naturally my hair's pretty thick. I mean, right now, like kind of coming back from that viral loss, like it's not as thick as it was, but I just thought to myself, well, if I have systemic, why wouldn't it like be a secondary maybe benefit, because everything's connected anyway. And if you're getting systemic benefits from, say, putting it on your sternum or putting it on your thyroid or putting it on your, even like your back, like that light is going to overall affect your health, because it's affecting your your mitochondria and your cellular health. And so there could be this, like, I don't know, this downstream or whatever it is, like effect where you're like, oh wow, like my hair, and who's to say, really, like you said, it's like you use the like for me too, I have the same thing. Like I have this rosemary spray that I spray in my after I shower, I put it on, and it's like, sometimes you never really know. You're just trying to do the best you can, and you're using a couple of targeted tools to help. But that's sort of where my mind went, because like for me to try to treat my head like, sort of get through that, it doesn't seem like it's worth the effort. So as long as I'm consistent with some systemic use, it could be beneficial, whether or not I can really say, oh yeah, it was the red light. That's probably not going to happen. Right. But yeah, I like that advice. And that's kind of where I was.
Yeah. And especially, with hair, it's like a kitchen sink approach, or, all these things. It's not just red light on its own. It's like diet, nutrition, sleep, stress, viral load. And like you said, it's like all these things together. Red light is just one very important, effective component, but it's part of, your overall health. Like, it's not like, oh, you can use red light therapy and negate, nutrition and exercise and all that other stuff. So it's just one big part of the puzzle.
Exactly. Well, as we sort of taper down here, because I feel like for the most part you've covered really anything that I think I have had written down, and then what also came in. But I do want to mention one more thing, and you did mention it when I had asked you about if there's any safe or unsafe places to use the light. But there was a question about fertility, and you kind of did make a mention as that there's some, indication that it can help with sperm health and quality. But what would you say about, like, are there studies out there? Are there people talking about specific wavelengths or excuse me, just specific, like, targeted treatments for fertility, male or female?
Yeah, I think, there are studies. I haven't dove too deep into them yet. A lot of them, maybe rodent studies and, things like that, or just isolated sperm cells or stuff like that. There are a lot of studies on that, of like the sperm mobility of like just shining red light and then they have better mobility. I guess, that's pretty neat. But and tons of anecdotal, mostly it seems to be anecdotal of people using it and, having better blood flow to their areas and, having better performance, feeling better, having more, hormonal energy from their better balanced hormones. You can manage, your cramps and, some of the bloating from, using red light therapy on your, over your gut and your lower abdomen. So, yeah, there's tons of benefits. I don't think it's super well studied on humans yet, but I think there's no reason not. Yeah, no reason not to. It seems like we get a lot of good anecdotal reports of that. So yeah, so you can go ahead and use it.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to the same thing that we were just discussing, which is like the systemic benefit can only be
Yeah,
like you can only increase your um or like things are not going to go the other way, I should say,
right.
right? Like
Yeah,
you're always going to have some kind of systemic benefit, even if you're
right.
treating one area.
And with
Um
the guys, there used to be a big myth. It's kind of faded away, which is good. Was that again the near infrared would be bad for your testicles, and it was like just so not true. There was one study on rodents that they used crazy high intensities and crazy high doses, and they showed like damage on rodent testicles. I was like, they used so much power, and but people weren't looking at it. They're just looking at the pictures of the damage, and they were trying to correlate it with like the red light didn't cause damage, the 660, but the near infrared did cause damage. But what happens is the red light was probably just burning the skin, and the near infrared was penetrating deeper and heating up the testicles. So obviously the testicles are outside the body. They need to be cooler. They're better, with icing the testicles and all that stuff is kind of a trend for guys. So again, don't need a lot of power, don't need a lot of intensity, don't need heat.
heat.
So right, and people are doing these big full body things and they're cooking themselves. And like, well, okay, So again, so yeah, it's again, everything just goes back to you can use it for almost anything, just low intensity, being responsible, and any biomarkers you can track is always a good thing too.
Yeah, yeah, no, well said. Well said. Well, I think, that I hope that we've sort of, or I should say you, because really not me. I'm just,
Sure.
I'm just over here continuing to learn. But I hope that we have cleared up some questions and confusion and stuff like that, because I think what's happened, which I mentioned in the very beginning of this discussion, is like there's so much hype and there's influencer hype and all of these things that are being discussed and promoted and projected out into the world. And I think it's like, then there's evidence. And I think like
Yeah.
what we have to focus on is just the simplistic part of it, which is the evidence. And I think that you've brought a lot of that to this discussion, which I think is what people want, because at the end of the day, they just want something that works, and they want simple, and they want
Yeah.
effective, and that's it. Like you said, like consumers don't need to be, they don't have to have all of the things memorized and, like all of the nitty gritty details. And, it's great
Right.
for people who want to learn and want to dig deep into the specifics, but that's not necessary. And so it's how to just evaluate what's best for you and based on just real evidence without the overwhelm, because people have been overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So as we sort of, close, I think, and again, you've answered this already, but what would you say to someone who is probably or potentially in the market for looking for, adding a device to their home or for their family or even for their children? Like, what would be your biggest piece of advice or your call to action, your takeaway for them? And what would be something to sort of disregard, toss out, like
Yeah.
not focus on? And like I said, I think I just want to kind of bring everything back to this grounding point, because you've been saying these things throughout, but just to sort of
Yeah.
stamp the envelope and take it to the post office.
Right.
Let's end there.
Yeah, so I think what we touched on was like a lot of people are trying to memorize wavelengths, 660, 850, 1060, memorizing wavelengths and what are the benefits, memorizing intensity levels, 10 milliwatts, 50 milliwatts, 100 milliwatts, and benefits, deep tissue or superficial, and then energy levels of joules per centimeter squared, 6 or 10 or 20, and what mechanisms are you activating? The cytochrome C oxidase, the easy water, and penetration depths and how that penetration works of high intensity, low intensity wavelengths. But like you said, it's all about an effective result. So if we can be confident in the studies, we can be confident in a lot of anecdotal experiences of people using, relatively low intensities and getting good results. And so it's not about saying, oh, I get tons of people, oh, I really care about certain wavelengths. I really care about this much penetration. I really care about certain intensity. I'm like, no, you don't care about any of that. You care about feeling better, about performing better, about recovering faster, about healing faster, about, your skin looking good. You don't care. And especially because I get that both ways, because then I expose that all the false advertising and whatnot. Then they say, oh, the consumers themselves, they say, well, I don't care because I'm feeling really good with despite all the false advertising. I'm like, okay, so you don't care about intensity and all that stuff. So we care about results and not so much about all these, nitty gritty parameters that we think we want to memorize. We want to have some intellectual satisfaction that we did research and we got, oh, watch out. If you don't get this, then, you got to get that and whatnot. So yeah, so there's a lot less pressure. The windows of wavelengths are very wide. The windows of intensities are very wide. The windows of exposure times are very wide. How often you can do it? You can do it every day. A lot of times is fine. Every other day, a couple times a week, you don't have to worry about, oh, I skipped one and I ruined my benefits. So it's a long-term kind of thing, and just find a cadence that works for you. So that's what I've designed all my products around. Low intensity, using responsibly. It comes with a simple instruction manual of like, use it for a certain amount of time, skin contact for deep tissue, distance for superficial stuff. Depending on the product, it might be 3 minutes to 20-minute treatment times, usually around 5 to 10. I say for most areas. Low intensity, 5 to 10 minutes, see how that feels, and then experiment more or less dosing and know that you can go higher or lower, and lower can sometimes have better results. So yeah, that's kind of the whole key is like, don't worry about memorizing tons of things, because that's, again, all articulated wavelengths of charts of, I was kind of mocking of like all these charts of wavelengths of this wavelength does this and this wavelength. And that's why you need 5 different devices, or you need a device that has 10 different wavelengths, even though that's going to dilute the share of each wavelength that you're trying to fit on a circuit board with only limited number of LEDs. So it's like, are you even getting therapeutic levels of all these different wavelengths that they're trying to cram into one product? So, yeah. And then, so all my products can be used safe and responsibly. If you follow my guides, you can, use other products responsibly. If you get it cheaper, consider using, incandescent heat lamps and stuff. I've got some good reviews. You can get them at the hardware store for $11 and use a little heat lamp. And if you want the heat therapy and the light therapy, and those longer wavelengths, where a lot of studies are coming out with longer wavelengths, and the LEDs are struggling, can't really produce longer wavelengths. So if you want longer wavelengths that around, the 1100s, the 1060s and beyond, which we're also finding out are very essential. A lot of research from Scott Zimmerman and some of those other researchers are saying even longer wavelengths, like from incandescent spectrums, are very vital for human health. So you can get that from incandescent bulbs, and you can get a lot done with broad spectrum lights and sunlight and all that stuff. So tons of options. Should be simple, safe. I've got all the science that shows you can use it super simple, low intensity, safe, consistently. I don't know, I like we've talked about before. It's all about like just repeating the message, being clear with the message, and saying, hey, we've got all the evidence. I don't know where brands and influencers are coming up with these big numbers. You need 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared for full body red light therapy. I've demanded it from them. They told me they don't have any. So I don't know what to tell people. So it's like, yeah.
No. It's good. It's good. It's a good place to land, I think, because, and I'll just throw in my 2 cents too, just about you and the brand in general, because I just feel like through the years, obviously I followed you for a long time. I started out with another panel from another company, and then I moved over to Gemba Red, and now have been using it religiously for several years. And I just think like through learning, interviewing you, And there was a question that came in that actually like ties into this, which is like, well, for someone who is maybe in the market and like, what would be like, why gamma red compared to others? I mean, you've pretty much answered that question throughout this entire episode, and and you're also very upfront with just like, okay, yeah, cool. If you have another panel, like, awesome, like use that
Yeah.
panel.
Right.
Just
I
be
would never,
smart.
right.
Yeah,
I don't want to tell people, oh, throw away that panel, buy mine
exactly,
instead. Like, I
exactly.
don't like waste or, I mean,
No.
you can make them work, especially like people are like, oh man, I wish I bought from you, but there's a high 20% restocking fee. I'm like, don't give them free money. That's for
Yeah,
sure. And
yeah,
pay the
yeah.
restocking fee. So, try to make anything where, it's like being like MacGyver with all these different lights and all these different, like, you can make any light work and be therapeutic. I tell people are like, oh, I heard you can do it red light therapy wrong. And what do I do? I'm like, listen, you can wrap yourself with enough Christmas lights, then you'll get red light therapy. Like, I'm like so tired of all this fear mongering. I'm like, if you don't buy from me, but yeah, I focus on proper intensities, which people consider low flicker, ultra low EMF, so you can feel safe using it on the skin. So again, I don't try to fear monger about that stuff, but people demand out of me if they want to feel comfortable using a skin contact device, it needs to be low EMF. So as an engineer, I can do low EMF. I'm not going to be like other brands that are like, well, you use a cell phone, don't you? Well, unless you throw out your cell phone, we're not going to make our products low EMF. It's like, well, that's horrible. Like, so low EMF, evidence-based wavelengths, the 660, 630, 810, 830, 850. Again, it's hard to get those wrong, but, we make sure we use them and get them all third-party tested, all our products third-party tested. The actual third-party results are what's on the product page, which is very key because a lot of companies have third-party testing, but then they're still deceitful on their product pages, which doesn't make any sense. I don't know, it only incriminates themselves. So the actual numbers are reflected there. So again, it's like you have to be able to trust a company. Like, I don't
Well,
know, like at some point, could they be fudging numbers? Could they be fudging third party results if they've been lying about intensity for years? How are you going to trust them for, oh, well, they have third party test results, but they just lie in these certain segments, but not in the other. Like, how are you going to trust that? I don't know.
exactly. Well, that's sort of where I was going. Was that like,
Yeah.
just from my own personal opinion and my own like, just, say I was literally just a customer and I was learning from, and I never interviewed you, and, I didn't know you like semi personally, like I would still have the same, I think, the same view or the same quote unquote review, which is I would learn that there's just like you're a grounded, evidence-based, practical teacher and researcher, and the stuff that you're producing in terms of knowledge is legit and it's evidence-based and it's not conflated. And I think when someone were to ask me, because this has literally been my response to people, is like, well, why, like, why would you say that I should buy a panel from Gamma Red versus, another? And my first response always is because there's integrity in the brand. Because, like, I would rather put my money towards, and by the way, too, your products are very reasonably priced, which is
Yeah.
like not always the case, unfortunately. My first panel, that company, the very sky high prices. But that's really like where I go with it, where I go with the answer is like, I kind of want to give my money or invest in an equipment, a piece of equipment or a device from someone who's like got some, just got some integrity attached to the brand. And so that's what I appreciate the most. And that's what I tell people, whether it's social media or other, because like, these questions, because it's such a trending topic, like I said, these questions
Yeah.
come up multiple times a month on and off, social media. So I think like that would be my answer even to the people who are wondering, like, why have you selected or why have you asked, Andrew to come on versus like another, company or another person who's, another founder? That's the reason.
Yeah.
So, I think just for me to you too, like, thank you. Like, thank you for providing such clear and concise information. Thank you for all the information that you have on your blogs. I mean, I've certainly learned so much over time, over the last, like, say, 5 or 6 years now, from the stuff that you put out. I think you put out really great information on social media. Some of it's actually really fun and really funny too, because you've got
Yeah.
that, like, a
Right.
comedic spin on things. But I just recommend to people that they, follow you and they go to the blog if they really want to dig into specifics and more information. I think between this podcast interview and the last, though, there's not a whole more, I don't think there's too much more that the average person would need to learn. But yeah, I just think that, I think you've done the red light therapy industry a good service just by being
Yeah.
honest. And I appreciate that. So just thank you, because I think people notice it. At least I think I notice it. And I think I just wanted to say that as we tie down, because it's important. And because people are always like, well, what about this? Or what about this? And what about this? I mean,
Yeah.
that's always my answer.
Right.
So,
No, I think I appreciate that. And,
yeah.
again, you can tell from reading my blogs and reading my content, it applies to any, the science is the science. So it can help any brand. And my competitors and their influencers have taken notice, and they'll lift stuff off my blogs all the time and kind of pretend like they knew all this stuff all along. Put it on their own blogs and put it on their own books, and not give me credit. So you'll see it kind of perpetuate all the way. So it's helping my competitors. So don't act like I'm just doing a big marketing bit, because my content, because it's so advanced, it seems to help my competitors more than it helps me when they lift it and use it for their own purposes. And the influencers can sound smarter. And you can see, like, sometimes the science I present contradicts my own products. Like, I did a blog about how 850 is not necessarily the best near infrared wavelength, because there's tons of studies. It was driving me crazy. Tons of studies that say 810 or even 830 are better. But I still use 850. So a lot of people were like, oh, well, he contradicts him. Why is he, saying 850 is not the best, but he's still using it on his products? And it's like, well, it's still a very effective wavelength. It's still got a lot of practical uses. It's got certain benefits. But it's just not documented as the best. Like, and that was just driving me crazy. Even though I still sell it, it's a great wavelength. I'll always include it in a lot of my products. And so, you'll find the companies and the influencers that, like, try not to ever contradict themselves or contradict the products that they're selling. And it's in their their content only helps themselves, and it can't help anyone else because it's so niche. And be like, oh, here's the best wavelength. Oh, what a coincidence, we have the best wavelength. And it's like, okay, how many times are you going to see this as a consumer of, like, they're going to describe the best red light therapy device, and then it's, oh, what a coincidence, we sell the best and it's all evidence based totally. And it's like, no way. So again, there's a lot of contradictions in the science, and I try to cover both ends of it as much as the evidence allows. And then people can choose for themselves and kind of take control of what they want to do with red light therapy. So it does leave things kind of ambiguous, but hopefully it's more empowering that people can take it into their own hands, experiment with how they dose it. Understanding all these principles will help them tailor it and get it perfect for their own body, because there's not one size fits all of, like, oh, follow my program for skin health, and here's the wavelengths, here's the times, and listen, you can make some oddly specific programs, and those will work for a lot of people, and then you can generate testimonials that way. But it's a lot more open-ended than people. So if you really want to dial it in, learn all these things for yourself, and then experiment and see what works best for you.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And I couldn't agree more, and it's been really effective for me in my life. So again, that's partially why we're having the conversations here, because I've seen a lot of positive effect. So, my friends, I will put all of the information in the show notes and make sure everything is updated for you in terms of where you can find Andrew Ngembaret on social media. He's the most active, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but on Instagram and YouTube, as well as the blog. And is there anywhere else that people can find you?
Yeah, I've got a Facebook page, a Facebook group. They're not very active, but if people prefer Facebook, a lot of the same posts will get cross post from Instagram to Facebook. So if people want to go there. They can email me if they've got some direct questions, anything specific. They can just find my email on the website, kembared@gmail.com, and it comes straight to me. So just ask your questions, and I'll reply to them.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. And what else was I going to say? I almost lost my train of thought there. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and I'll make sure that everything is in the show notes for you, and as always. And if you have any questions, you can absolutely reach out. Like I said, you can reach out to me, or you can reach out to Andrew. And there is a listener code that is still active. Yes, I believe
Yeah,
it is still
yeah,
active.
yeah.
It's been there
It'd be the
since,
same,
yeah, it's been
the
there
same code. Yeah.
since the last episode a couple of years ago. So that will also be in the show notes for you. And it's Vanessa 10, which is 10% off any and all devices that Andrew has on the site. So you are, more than welcome to use that as well. And yeah, I think that does it for, at least for now, until the
Yeah, maybe for a couple of years. Yeah.
right, so we can come back and see how everything has evolved. But in all seriousness, thank you so much for coming back on the show. It's just been so helpful. It's been enlightening. I'm always learning from you, whether it's during interviews or, just regularly following you on social media and the things that you're sharing. So I appreciate the way that you approach everything from a business standpoint. I just appreciate it's like an overflow of info. And
Yeah.
when I think that as simple as it is, I'm still always learning, but
Yeah. So am I. Yeah.
yeah.
Same here.
Yeah,
Yep.
so which is the beauty of it. But at the end of the day, it really is simple, and it should be simple and safe and all the things. And so hopefully people have gathered and will take that away at the end of the day after they've heard this. So again, my gratitude to you. Thank you so very much for coming on the show. I appreciate it very, very much.
Yes. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, my friends. Thank you so much for joining us. Until the next time, I hope you all have a very, very blessed day, and I will see you soon.